Hey there, welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabrielle Nicolay. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and a parent coach. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Cindy Duffy and Donna Redman. Guys, welcome.
Welcome. It's
Thank
great to
you.
be here. I'm
Donna,
excited to talk with you.
I'm excited to have this conversation. So I'm going to have you introduce yourselves just a little snippet first. Donna, go ahead.
Thanks for having us. I initiated the Secret Genius Project based on my research on the connection between art, science, and nature, and our connection to those things. And then we collaborated with Cindy Duffy, who's a sensory processing expert and human development expert on sensory processing because she's an occupational therapist and a regular rock star when it comes to kids with sensory issues.
All right. And kids with sensory issues are one of my favorite things to talk about. So, Cindy, tell us a little bit about you. And
this is good. It's my favorite thing to talk about. So I'm an occupational therapist. I started work in 1981, actually, at an associate degree. And I was working in developmental centers, very intense population. But I also noticed that although they were using behavior strategies, all kinds of sensory information was like interfering or adding to. And I said, wow, I really need to go back to school. So after a couple of years of that, I went back to school, got my bachelor's degree, and began working. And I've been working ever since then. I got a pediatric certificate from Misericordia for like most current updates stuff. But basically, my passion is sensory processing, and I've seen it with developmentally delayed population that are geriatrics. I've worked with sensory in the VA with Alzheimer's groups. Like pretty much any approach I use, I have a foundation of sensory with all humans, right? Because we're all this organic piece of material walking around the planet, sort of, right? And so I always look at things from a neuro perspective more than behavior. And when I see a behavior, I ask myself, what is that really telling me if someone doesn't have language? And a lot of my persons didn't, whether it was a stroke patient or really involved developmental delay. There's behavior that tells us things. And so that was the root of it, zeroing in on behavior for a long time now. And it's kind of my thing. I really, like you were saying, toddler whisperer, and people said, how did you read that? And it's like, I can't explain it. You just, once you get the sensory thing, you really get it. I always wanted to get it to parents. So parent coaching is my thing. Mm-hmm. I really like to talk to parents. That was my way with early intervention and all. So that's it. That's what brings me here. I met Donna. We were talking about how a lot of the focus is what people can't do. But with the sensory people, they have these really magical things that they can do sometimes that we don't look at or we don't even see. So we talk about focusing on people's assets, and you have to find them sometimes. So that's the secret genius that when Donna said I'm secret genius, I'm like, yeah, I've always told people your child has something locked in there. We just have to find it. And a lot of progress because parents understand it. There's an alignment with the parents. It's not bad parenting. It's not a behavior program that has to have tally sheets on the wall. They learn this stuff. I'm like, you will learn from me what this is, and then you will become the best me for your kids because you're mom or dad.
Yeah.
And that's where I've kind of lived for years. So that's pretty much it.
I love it. And for anybody who's listening, who's like, what are we even talking about? We're going to come granular for just a second because to my understanding, and I want you guys to jump in here, Donna, probably you at first. We're talking about three things that are all related, of course, which is we live in bodies that are sensory based.
Mm-hmm.
We live in an environment that is nature based, or slightly less nature-based because it's 2025. And Donna, you said something about hard science. So can you just thread all three of those together?
Yeah. So So my original research had to do with our connection to art, science, and nature. And I began to see things that were cross-pollinating each other, and one thing supported the other. And so then further along, it became apparent that the neurology of the human body was affected by the environment. And so there was research back in 1999, early 2000s, from Samir Zicki and Raman Kondran, who did some studies showing neurons firing in the brain. Now we see it intangibly, that when we see something of beauty, neurons do fire in the brain. This now shows us the scientific evidence behind the feeling we get when we are in an environmental situation that's affecting us. Further, there were examples of Alzheimer's patients who had been lost, in their own cognition, now being brought in front of great artwork, and they can now recall their lives. This is stunning to me at this point. The fact that we are sensory beings and we are living in the world, that the first encounter with the world is through our senses, yet it's the foundation of it is widely misunderstood, and we have kids in the school system who are trying to function in a school environment in that setting, and teachers are very dedicated. However, they're educators and they're not occupational therapists, and of course there's support systems, but it does empower parents, educators, and teachers to understand on a more multi-dimensional level what's actually going on with kids who maybe they don't understand why they're eloping or why they're freaking out, and it may be a simple fix.
You used a word that I want to clarify a little bit, which was environment. And it seems like we understand or should understand what we mean when we say the environment at school, yeah. For example, the school environment. And yeah. I just want to point out, and please add here, but I'm going to list some things that I consider to be included in the school environment, which would be things like how much or how little natural light is there. How rushed or not rushed is the schedule? How many transitions are there? Is it a cinder block building? Probably. And how is sound being transmitted in the physical space? So when we talk about environment, we're talking about the physical environment, the sensory environment, the emotional environment. What am I missing here? Fill me in.
I think you're hitting it all. But I think when you even talked about lighting environment, these are the things I like to bring to people, and understanding sensory can make them more aware, is that a fluorescent light, we think of lighting in the eyes, but there's actually a sound for some really, I think you call them orchid children, sensory kids. They can hear. And so I've had kids in my office, and I actually have to turn the lights off because it's an office building and that's how it is. But I turn the lights off because they're like this to tune it out. So again, a behavior of noise was to turn off the sound. So if we're trying to, if I was disciplining the sound, saying like quiet, quiet hands, that sound is going to make them crazy. And of course, then you'll get eloping. So in all the work that I've done, and when you're talking about a school environment or a home environment, it's the subtle things that you can learn about what an environment is. What is your home environment? What's the overstimulation, understimulation? What we feel is okay may not be okay for a child who has some special needs. So exploring those things, so many parents are like, my child's 13 and I never heard of this. And that amazes me, right? And that's part of why I started really talking, because to have adult children tell me they never heard of sensory and they're 20 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to give you a practical example. My fridge makes a very high-pitched noise that only bothers me. And I paid a lot of money for my fridge and I won't be replacing it. But I will tell you every day when I go downstairs to the kitchen, it's a couple minutes of like that noise. That's the fridge. You don't have to pay attention to it. It's not going to hurt you. But that is a conscious thing
Right.
that I am doing for my nervous system. And if I am 2 years old or 5 years old or 13 years old and I don't understand what's happening, then I'm doing all kinds of other things to block it out, to avoid it. Maybe I don't go into the kitchen
Right.
because, and I can't tell you why, right?
That's right.
And so, as somebody who's, diagnosed herself with a very mild sensory processing disorder retroactively, the ability to know why you're bothered it's an executive function skill that doesn't come online for quite some time, if we even have the information.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. And for me, the role in a school or a home would be, as I'm screening and filtering that, that's what I put online. I notice that this person runs out of the room every time the air conditioner comes on. Or another favorite sensory area of mine is, and you might appreciate this with speech, language, reading, visual. In many situations, my son went to an optometrist. He has glasses. He has 20/20 eyesight, 20/20 vision. No, he doesn't have 20/20 vision. He has 20/20 eyesight. Vision involves 6 muscles on both eyes working together, going into the brain through a nerve to be perceived and then sent to a part of the brain. So for many kids, the child who's not forming letters accurately, pressing too hard, erasing frequently, messy work, staying from recess. Oh my gosh. When in fact, there's maybe eye muscle problems where there's double vision. The line is moving on the page, so they're chasing the line. The letters don't, because their line moves right on the line. I am writing on the line. And if they think everyone sees this way, they're not going to say to you, my line is moving or I don't see correctly. Personally, for me, I used to say it looks like the print on the page is smeared, like it was wet and someone ran their eyes across it. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to go to the line underneath it, I would reread the same line. This is a personal experience for me, but my mom took me to an eye doctor who said she has 20/20 eyesight and she's being attention seeking. Well, I was 35 when someone discovered a skull fracture on the back of my head when I fell out of an apple tree in 2nd grade, and my reading went from high-level reading to remedial by 3rd grade. But nobody knew better. So for me, reading was a task. Now, I only discovered that when, as an OT, I got diagnosed. Then I went to a developmental optometrist who explained it all. And finally, 38, 39 years old, I discovered it's not me, it was my eyes. Mm-hmm. So even with children, they'll be like, I'm dumb, I can't do this. And I'm like, no, actually, you're very smart. Your eyes are being dumb. They're not listening to you. They go, really? Really? That's like, and that changes their whole affect toward everything, that I can do this. It no longer is a self-esteem squash. It's more like I can do this. And it's so important.
Well, it's so important. And I really, you've said it twice already in this short time that we've been talking, but I really want to drive this home. Behavior is communication. Behavior is not random. If you want to go listen to another podcast episode with Kelsey Olds, who's another occupational therapist, the occupational therapist, talks about everything makes sense. Everything that everybody does makes sense because behavior is telling us something about what's going on in a person's body, in a person's brain, what they're having trouble with. This is not, children do not wake up in the morning and concoct 10 different ways to piss us off before noon.
Yes. You just actually said what was like I did a whole research thing for that pediatric certificate back in 2007. And it said that the theme of it was, our children are adolescents and adults diagnosed with mood disorders actually undiagnosed sensory processing.
Sure.
At that time, there wasn't a lot of linear research to that, but on the psychological studies, sensory information, sensory treatment reduced anxiety. Like, okay, so the treatments were helping, right? Nowadays, they have significant knowledge in that. And the part of our sensory system of the interoceptors are part of sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system, which then also makes us look at traumas, significant trauma, or perhaps being forced to eat soggy spinach till it's gone. To a child who wants to vomit, just looking at it could be a degree of trauma where all that gets triggered and you get behavior. So yeah, it all makes sense.
And this is why we're so focused on, the difference between a sensory origin and a behavioral origin, and balancing those two systems appropriately. So, because one overdone without the other, when it's not balanced, could cause trauma all by itself. Isn't that right?
Yes. Being disciplined for something you can't help.
Right.
Yeah, say more about that. Give us an example or say more.
Well, Cindy, do you want to talk about the sensory origins of things? Like when we talk about a child in school who's being tapped,
Well,
on
yeah.
the tactile.
I have a favorite, and I was working with a child. I started working with him at 5. Then he kind of did okay, and then got diagnosed. Back then it was Asperger's. So then he came back at 9 and he did okay. And then whatever. And then I got him in middle school again. And he's at this point homeschooled. And he was still environment change, but he was literally, math came to him. He melted down. Anything that had complicated visual tasks, meltdowns. I would actually lay on the floor with him and he'd be crying. I'd be like, I know this is terrible. This is so hard, but we can do this. What we did is we went through a series of things. We did discover a vision issue that was multiply identified. So even if you're not special ed, but you have 1 in 4 children have undiagnosed vision problems, and you could be considered typical and have that. So the vision, I always look at vision first, no matter what. And we found vision problems. The school had been testing him. Everybody was testing him. We got an outside evaluation. He had a specific math disability, was never identified. But those two things created a behavioral meltdown in this child. All that, just present him with a math equation, present him with graph paper, he would just lose his mind. When we started to explain to him this, like, it is my eyes, we got some encouragement, we worked through it. This was a child who, by the time he was a freshman in high school, they were looking at, he's not going to graduate. There's no way we can get him through school. With all the correct identifications and the accommodations and further testing, it turned out he had, as a sophomore, his English language skills from being an avid reader, believe it or not, he would close one eye. He was at a master's level in English language. He also was a history buff. All the reading he did was history. He was at a master's level in knowledge of history, in history and arts and stuff like that. So his whole academic program changed to remedial math, not even remedial math, more of an accounting math, like a business math. Forget trigonometry things, forget algebraic equations with multiple steps. That is executive functioning he didn't have. Basics, just can you do a checkbook, all that. That's all he'd ever need, because he wants to read about history, They ended up putting him in advanced placement where junior and senior year, he took college math, history, college language, took it over this summer. Long story short, by what would be a sophomore year in college for anybody else, he graduated and went on to get his master's in the next 2 years. So within a bachelor's, this is a kid who wasn't supposed to make it through school at like 21, has a master's degree.
And
all from just getting behind the right stuff.
Yeah. And this goes, I mean, there's so much here. The core of what you're saying is, and again, I'm coming back to this, right? Behaviors communication. Look underneath. There's something there. And Donna, what I hear you saying is look at the behavior and start to peel the layers off of that. Look at the underlying sensory components and start to address and fill in and augment those. And then what I also hear you saying, so this is very nuanced and layered, is take a strength-based approach. Like, let the kid do basic math and advanced history.
Yeah, right.
That actually does make sense for this child.
Right. Specific to each child, right.
Each child, and every child does, and every adult as well, has a sensory profile. So the story you told before reminds me of when Cindy and I were in a seminar. Cindy was teaching it, and this woman in the group, she started crying, and she then explained how all these years she thought she was stupid, and it was really her reticular eye movement, vestibular eye, right, Cindy?
Right. The vestibulo-ocular reflex was off.
Yeah.
So she was the, I don't do bicycles. I don't do, all that.
And she thought she was stupid. And so magnify that by the hundreds of thousands of people that are just being moved through the school system, for example. And we focus on the school system because that's the catalyst of where, it's a rich environment to either, make a change or not, and Cindy's worked in that environment for many, many years. And that is a place where we could really leverage this knowledge and awareness to empower parents and educators so they feel a lot more comfortable in their skin rather than, having a spitball, and depend on other people if they have their own body of knowledge. It's empowering for themselves to be able to direct a child or a person appropriately. Because, Cindy and I talk all the time about how many people are unaware of these things and the entire trajectory of their lives are, on the wrong track because they just didn't know what they didn't know.
Yeah, right. I actually, speaking to what Donna just said too, I had a really interesting experience. I was working with a teacher who was in special ed, but for this particular year received a classroom of very, very difficult behavioral classroom with autism. And she'd work with autism, but not like this. And so she's in the classroom and really frustrated. And I like to work in the classroom so I could see all the environmental stuff, right? So, she was going through a lot of stuff and I could see, like Donna was saying, a lot of effort, but I could feel her really struggling. So we stepped out in the hall and I said, can we have lunch together, And I had lunch with her and we talked about all this stuff. And she was like, this is fascinating. I go, once a week I'm there. So I come back a week later and she said, can I talk to you in the hallway? I said, yeah. Went out in the hallway and she said, I figured out the problem. I said, what? She said, these guys are all seekers, banging things. They're like, the loud, moving around. Cindy, I'm a sensitive. She was an orchid person in a classroom with beyond dandelions, right? Yeah, I don't know what kind of flower that is.
different species of orchid. Yeah, but yes.
You know what I'm saying? So she was like, and she goes, if I could start to manage my stuff. So she would even bring in little earplugs for herself. She did her own stuff to get through the different times for, like you, the refrigerator, right? Loud, she put the earplugs in. Now her nervous system isn't shocked. It's kind of like managing. And I thought, wow, that was my best experience, is the teachers and the kids, right? But it was great. She was very happy with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you're describing, and it's again, this is just like another layer to what you guys are doing, which is that what's the energetic match? What's the match between the kids and the adults? Like that's a topic that is years of study and multiple PhDs. Because right, and how do we calibrate that? And so it strikes me that that's really where you guys are working is like, okay, understand some things about how the sensory system works, how it interacts with the environment, and that this is a research-based field.
And it's also people with each other, siblings. Yeah. I had a sensitive, right? My autism one sensitive, but I also had a ADHD who. So he'd be like, I'm not touching you. I'm not. And she'd be like, ah. And it was the two different sensory profiles in the same room together, literally. But it does make a difference. I've had moms say, my baby likes dad more. Well, dad was one of these. Hey. And mom was like this. The baby likes this, not this. And I said, you have to, I know you want to be a mushy mommy, but your baby likes you got to be a daddy mommy. As soon as she got like more like that, the connection was there. There was no, attachment problem going on. It was two different styles with a certain receptive nervous system.
Yeah.
From the beginning of life.
Oh my God. Okay. So that's a whole other topic about how infants, and we're not going to go there today, but just food for thought, right? If you're listening, infants come in with a sensory profile that either gets honored or not honored. And if it is not honored, then we're doing behavior, right? To try to accommodate. And now we're on a different developmental trajectory. And so that's real. I love what you said about, being a daddy mommy, which is like more forceful, right? That kid's nervous system required more input.
Right.
And they were going to have to generate that through crying, through hitting, through bouncing, through whatever, unless it was delivered to them via the parent. We don't always know these things. And if you didn't know these things, it's fine. It works itself out. Everybody gets what they need at some point.
Right.
Donna, take us home. If people want to learn more about the Secret Genius Project and your work, what do they do, please?
So the website is thesecretgeniusproject.com. And right on the home page, there should be a pop-up there for a free quick start guide that has some information about sensory processing that would help people get started.
Fantastic. We will link to all of that in the show notes. And Donna and Cindy, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Gabrielle. This was really fun. Thanks a lot.